let's talk about gun control for a minute. I have a question, right? So, uh, in the beginning, I mentioned that there are three different constant ways of looking at the Constitution from a legal perspective, right? One of
Mhm.
them is like an originalist, right? Basically, whatever the original intent of the law was, and you perceive that and then apply. One of them is a textualist, someone who just kind of like looks at the law as written, whatever it says, and then applies that. And one of them is like kind of a progressive who just, like you mentioned, they just want to find whatever result they're
Yes.
looking for, right? Now, gun control is an interesting one for me, right? Because normally I would claim that I am an originalist for the most part, for the most part. But gun control changes that for me a little bit because um, it's tricky, right? Like they couldn't have anticipated some of the technology that we've got today, right? Like like arms, yes, but what if someone has a nuclear arm, right? What if someone
So
has a
yeah. So I would say um, we don't have the right to have the same um, weapons that our military uses against other nations, but we
right?
have every right to have every level of technology of weapons that our government would use against the citizenry to
Hmm.
police them, right? To enforce anything. So anything that at the police level or the National Guard level that we would use for national defense inside the country towards citizens,
Huh.
citizens should have that level, right? Nuclear weapons we have never used against our own citizenry. If we ever do, then I think, yeah, that would open up a can of worms. Now we can have citizens who can have nuclear weapons to defend themselves. I mean, we never
Okay.
would, but if we ever use a weapon against our own citizens in the United States, then I think it qualifies for Second Amendment protection,
Huh.
right? Anything the government uses. And so
So
that's why it's not just muskets. Whatever the
you're talking
government,
about
yeah.
you're talking about policing,
We
like
have police weapons,
what
but
about
National Guard that would be deployed in the United States. If they deploy National Guards in the United States and use those weapons, like in Waco or something
so
like that, every weapon that the FBI used or National Guard or whoever ATF used in their assault on Waco should forever be legal to the citizenry. Once the
interesting.
United States government uses a weapon in the United States against its citizens, we are able to have that equivalent in our homes forever.
So let me ask you this because I think they use 50 cals in Waco.
Yeah, if they don't want us to have 50 cals, they don't want us to have new technology, right? Then they just need to stick to
I mean,
bow and arrows in policing, right?
don't get me wrong, like because here's where I'm at, right? Like,
Is that a
don't get me
spicy
wrong, because
take? Is that
I
a
I
spicy
feel
take?
like I feel like it's one thing for a kid to go into a school and he's got some mental health problems and he hits up the school with a rifle, right? And
A
this is
22 caliber. Yeah.
let's say even say it's an AR-15 and it can fire like three shots, and it's still not doing anywhere like the 60 rounds a minute that, or like 50 cals can go up to like 300 rounds a minute or 600 rounds a minute. That's like he could
And
literally cut a
right,
school in half,
yeah.
with that.
And I think that's the only way that we get the government to to reserve back and not use their weaponry against their citizens. Is I would enact codes, at least maybe starting today, that if any police force has a weapon in their arsenal, that has to be publicly available and legal for
Hmm.
their citizenry to also own.
With
And if the government ever uses that in America, right, that's the standard. So they're the ones who are escalating, right? I think the intent of the Second Amendment that makes the other amendments really mean anything is the citizens can be just as well armed, right, as a militia, right, as their government, right, and keeping a well-funded militia, well stocked, right, that well stocked means that they can have everything the government is stocking,
interesting, interesting.
right,
So you're
and so that's just like it. Even though I'm not a gun guy, I'm a city boy,
that's kind of
right?
in between, right?
I'm not interested in guns, right? But I feel like constitutionally or as the rights, that this one is so foundational to our freedoms. This right that the government cannot restrict this right, and the government is the one that sets that sets the standard on technology. And if they
Right.
want that technology to go down, they need to start using non-repeating rifles, small magazines, no
Now,
bump stock.
my brother has an interesting answer, which is more like a textualist answer. Basically, he said that any arm that you can bear, right, like anyone you could hold in your hand,
Uh-huh.
right. So, like 50 cal would be out because you can't physically hold that by yourself. You'd need like a turret or a vehicle, right? So, or something like that, or you'd need
I can show you a 50 cal anti helicopter weapon that you definitely hold on your shoulder. Though the kick on it, there's a video of a guy shooting
like,
it on YouTube, and the kick on it was, he says it was the most humbling thing he ever did in his whole life. Was like that it just stripped him of ego, is like the kick on this thing. But
right.
right, it was obviously a single load at a time kind of 50
Right.
cal.
Yeah, I
But
mean, even
yeah,
even arms
but
that you can bear are pretty
yeah.
sick, like javelins and stingers and stuff like that. You can
Yeah. And
but
so, if they have like, hey, if we're just doing normal patrols, right, this is what we have. But if we're ever going to equip our the thought has been, if we're ever going to equip our policemen or National Guard with certain weapons to use against American citizens, they need to know that will now qualify all those weapons for legal ownership for American citizens, and that'll put some reservations in there that the government should not, with impunity, be allowed to just use whatever they want and say this is good for me but not for you. Now, foreign wars or foreign militaries, I'm allowed them to, the best of the best. But if they're
right.
not using that to have power over us, then I'm allowed. That's a judicious. That's wise use of those arms. As soon as they turn those weapons against us,
Yeah.
right now, all of a sudden, right, everybody can buy that,
It's
and
interesting. Now,
that's essential.
what about licensing though? Would you at least, because I mean, like police officers do have to go through a rigorous training process in theory, right? You have to get a license, have to do that X, Y, Z. Would you at least require like a license for like an ATV because police have ATVs? Would you at least require a license still for a helicopter because police have
Well,
helicopters?
I think common sense age restrictions, right, for adults, right,
Okay,
are reasonable.
but not
And
operating license.
I think they're right, as long as the spirit of the law is, because if the government's not arming children, then we don't, right. If the government is restricting itself in the same way, right, requiring licensing. One of the big things, if a police officer fires a weapon, say you have a gun from a police officer goes bam, 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 right? They have
Right,
about 10 pages of paperwork justifying each time they discharge their weapon.
right,
Right? That's 50 pages. Why all they're thinking to do, they have to justify each one of those shots, right? And again, it's we as citizens, if we discharge a firearm in the city limits, we're gonna have to come up with real good justifications for each one. So
yeah.
if the government holds themselves to a standard, right, uh, um, then they can hold us to that standard, right?
Okay, so for
It's as
example,
soon
the
as I'm
government can.
suspicious of like FBI or people that can have crazy guns that we're not allowed to have, or discharge and use them without facing any consequences or review, right? It's this sort of, I can just shoot and I don't have to do any paperwork. If that's the case, I think then citizens should also have that same right, right? But if we're licensing government officials, then we can license citizens.
Okay. Well, we do license government officials to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, for the most part. I mean, obviously not like CIA, but you know, everybody else. I
Well, the
mean, even they
CIA
have like
again is not supposed to be
not
against
supposed
citizens
to,
on our soil.
but they do. We know that.
Yeah,
We know
and
this.
if they
Yeah. I mean,
do, then everything they use against us becomes legal. Right?
indeed,
There
indeed.
should be a website saying, "Hey, this gun was used by this official again in American soil against a U.S. citizen. Buy it here. Now
Mhm.
legal." And just
Well,
have a random word.
hopefully it never comes to that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, real quick. So DM, I didn't. You said something about Romania. I didn't quite understand what you were saying. I guess hit us back when you get the answer to my question. What manipulation were you talking about in Romania? Anyway, so Tanya, what we didn't really discuss USIP directly, but what we did discuss is the injunction regarding the USIP, of course, because that's part of the game, right? Part of the game here, and I'll talk with you about USIP a little bit later, but part of the game is whether or not USIP is a good system or a good bureaucracy, like a good agency, doesn't really matter because it's not the court's decision whether or not Trump declares if Trump declares an emergency, that's well within his power as an executive. And if he declares an emergency and says these people need to go, this basically this
What's
whole agency.
USIP? What's USIP?
USIP is United States something of peace. It's not actually about
Oh,
peace anymore.
Institution of Peace.
Institution of Peace. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well,
It
yeah.
started out
Well,
that way, but
Yeah.
it is growth. The thing about these bureaucracies is that most of them start out with this great idea, but then after they're in, they basically have only one reason to exist, and that is to keep making themselves bigger and more powerful, to keep expanding
to ensure their jobs go on forever. There's
Right.
no constitutional right that federal jobs go on forever. This is one of the injunctions Trump is facing. He should be able to remake the executive and make the workforce a lot smaller. There's no right that once you're hired in the federal government, you get to work there as long as you want.
right now. And the agency, right? The like, all right, you create all these agencies, EPA and OSHA and da like a million different things. But the thing is, at some point in time, if the president of the United States declares that there's an emergency and says we need to make some budgetary changes, then he has the right to do that. And there really there's no particular reason why the judge would be able to step in unless, for example, the president violates a protected class when he's doing it, or unless he breaks another part of the Constitution, which not in this case is he doing that. I mean, there are some other cases that are closer, like one I'm going to ask Christian about right now, which is birthright citizenship.
All right, we're going to get to that. I want to just comment on USIP.
Yeah.
Again, USIP just once again was a case of they gamed the system. They went too far. They weren't providing the service they were providing for themselves, and again, not something that's needed. Maybe in the future this could be remade with better oversight, but I agree that for the time it should be eliminated. All right.
So, birthright citizenship. This is one of those cases where, again, a textualist would just read the text as is and say, look, this is what it says, and it says if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. Right, that's all it says, really. I mean,
no. Let's read it. Read me the text.
Sure, I'll read you the text. Here we go. 14th Amendment. All right. Where is the actual text? Actual text is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws.
Okay, so fuzzy area on this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States. Oh, right. I was going to say and territories, which that's subject to the jurisdiction thereof would be U.S. territories.
Yeah, correct. Although, one thing I would grant is that I personally don't believe that illegal immigrants are subject to our jurisdiction. I think legal non-citizens are, right? Like if you come here and you declare yourself at a port of entry, then you're subjecting yourself to our jurisdiction. But if you come in like you just skip across the border and nobody sees you, I don't think that counts. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. You're sort of taking the wind out of my arguments there, but that what we've been having is how this is understood, right? If you're born here in the United States or the territories, you're a citizen for life. That's how it's commonly understood, and I think generally I don't have a problem with that. The problem has been that people have been gaming the system, right?
Right.
And that's why, right? The people have crossed into this country illegally, not at a gate, or they've crossed in customs and not declared that they're pregnant and intending to give birth in the United States, which is information we should evaluate.
Right.
And might deny them entry based on that. If they conceal that information, come here and have this child, immediately leave, right? That's the thing when we're talking about gaming the system, especially Chinese that are doing this in Guam has become a big problem. I understand that because our immigration system is very tied towards reunification of families. Once they have this child, they call it an anchor baby. Now they can enter illegally into the country, have a child, show paperwork that it's a citizen, and then we need to reunify this family by giving us all legal resident status here in the United States. So that was not how it was intended when it was written in 1868, right? And it's been sort of gained.
Now, so one thing I'll say, like as a textualist, I think it is what it is. Now, as an originalist, like if you were to take the original concept of the amendment, it really didn't have anything to do with people coming into the nation temporarily. Like it really had nothing to do with that. What it was about slavery, right? It was about all these slaves are already in the nation. They're already here. And we're like, whatever, let's just make them citizens, right? Like, never mind how they got here, wonder what circumstances they gained their naturalization process. But we're just like, let's just go ahead and make them citizens, right? And get that right. That was the point of the amendment. Now, from an originalist standpoint, I don't think the point was ever to allow, like, for example, the guy who wrote the amendment, I believe, specifically said not to include, like, the kids of foreign ambassadors, for example, or stuff like that. But nowadays, right? The other side of this is one way that we determine laws through precedent, right? And we've basically got a century of law that says if you've managed to squeak in, then you're good.
Here's my spicy take on this.
All right, let's hear it.
Get ready for my spicy take. So
here we go.
The people, right, will become citizens, right? So some Chinese national, Chinese citizen, takes a vacation to Guam while pregnant, comes to the custom. I'm just here for a vacation. Stay at your beautiful resorts here in Guam. Doesn't declare that they're pregnant. 2 days after they arrive, they have a labor. Maybe it's even induced labor. Maybe they go into labor. It's either one.
Right.
They have a child. That child, I think, should be a citizen. But I think that you could write a law that based on when the parents weren't a citizen and crossed here under bad intention to game the system by not declaring things like that, you can then later disqualify and remove that citizenship. Now, not without due process, right? You wouldn't do it. You'd have to have a hearing before a judge and present evidence. But that child would be granted citizenship, but then say, oh, because the people entered here and their entry and the nature of their birth, the situation, the context, shall we say, of their birth was illegal, we are now going to officially revoke their citizenship and not recognize it. Now, so this would give them, they would be born citizens, but would lose their citizenship because of the illegality of their parents. Right?
Interesting.
If their parents crossed our border illegally or lied on customs. Right now, people who come here, right, and lie on their customs things can have their residency or citizenship revoked.
Right.
Now, that would be a temporary say, please don't game the system. We'd like to act in good faith. You're born here, you're a citizen, but we can't ignore bad actors, especially at the scale that they're doing it. That there are planned like tourism groups in China promoting this. It is a taught way for people from South America that want to skip the line to get pregnant and go and have their baby for free in an American hospital kind of thing. It's bad for our institutions, and it's not what you said. in the spirit of the law. So
Sure.
that would be my spicy take, and the approach that I think would be the most likely to pass scrutiny
Interesting.
if a government enacted it. All right, tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that we're punishing a child for sins that that he or she is not personally committing.
Well, the parents are trying to use
Right,
this child for things
are
the child
committing the
hasn't
sin.
chosen to do. They're trying to use this child to manipulate
Well,
our.
So I feel like if the problem is the parents gaming the system, then we should write a law to punish the parents, right? And it sucks for the child who may be, in fact, a citizen here, stuck here without parents because the parents broke a law and like, screwed up. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, any way we slice this, it's not going to be great, right? Obviously, or like the best case scenario, in my opinion, is we just repeal the amendment or change the wording of it, right? And say, look, if you're born here or naturalized here of citizens, right, or of naturalized citizens, or of people who are here, under legal pretext and have been here for at least X amount of days or something like that, then sure. But like nobody's going to do that
This
because it
doesn't
requires
say
the
that
supermajority.
citizenship cannot be revoked, right? I think that they are citizens, but that and they're subject to Fourth Amendment. But in a hearing under a judge, right, they can then lose that citizenship, and it's not
Now,
guaranteed for life. Is what I would say. I would say
here's
that
my
citizenship is not
spicy take.
guaranteed for life.
You ready?
Okay.
Ready for my spicy take? I think
Yeah.
that we should bring back exile as a formal punishment. I think that banishment and exile is just something that's been around since the dawn of time. I don't know why we don't use it because it's actually rather more humane often than many of the other punishments that we could give. And I say, look, if somebody creates the wrong kind of problem and like for example, the kind of person we would deport, I would say, look, you're banished forevermore, never come back to the United States of America. A decree here, and that would be, and then for someone like this or someone who gained the system, you guys are banished, like that's it, goodbye. And you could be a citizen, but a banished one. You can have a wonderful life as a exiled citizen in China, or whatever. That's my spicy take,
Wow. That would be
But anyway.
interesting, right? But again, that would have to be done with due process because citizens
Sure,
are
of
due
course.
process. So you couldn't do that. You can't do that as a class. You'd have to do it on an individual basis.
Of course,
right?
absolutely.
But that is right. Part of it is jealous countries. Which countries are going to take our exiles, right? But that's another way around. I just think that citizenship for a child born of non-citizens is reviewable and could be potentially revoked. Right.
Right.
Say, really, you're a naturalized citizen of, especially if there's ever any dual citizenship. Anyway,
listen, guys, we're a little bit over
going
time.
about it directly, just saying no, we're not going to grant these people citizenship. I don't think that would stand up. I think,
right.
Right.
It's a long shot.
You'd have to have some way to review their citizenship or recognize their citizenship in a banished or exiled state.
Right. All right, guys. Well, look, that's all we had for you today. It was kind of a crazy one, but hopefully Christian will be here on time Saturday, and we'll be able to crank this up.
No doubt. But yeah, I just think it's important, like for the common man, just to realize the elites don't want us to know the Constitution.
Right.
They want to gatekeep knowledge so that they can game it and loophole it, or and hopefully that we won't object to the laws that are infringing upon our rights.
Right.
So it's important for us to understand this, and even when we have spicy takes or we do things that are kind of funny, at heart it's a serious matter that the government is limited by the Constitution, right? That limits what we do, and that's what makes the American experiment different. And we've gotten to a point where our federal government has gotten so powerful, we're losing the distinction between other countries that have, very, very powerful federal governments. That's not the intention of the American experiment. And I applaud Trump for attempting to descale, especially the executive branch that he can.
Yeah, agreed. Yep.
Guys, that's my closing statement.
Yep, mine too. Arm yourselves. Arm yourselves with knowledge. Read the Constitution cover to cover, and when that'll be the best way to be a powerful common man. Catch you guys next time. Common Mansplaining.